Unlike other policies, such as those regarding health, education, or defense, the Common Agricultural Policy, also known as CAP, is one of the European Union's most central policies and aims to ensure that food is high quality, safe, and affordable for the consumer. The three priorities of CAP are viable food production, sustainable management of natural resources, and the balanced development of rural areas throughout the EU. But did you also know that rural areas make up more than 77% of the territory of the EU, with about half of the population? That there are approximately 12 million full-time farmers in the EU, and that the EU's food industry and agriculture sector accounts for 6% of the EU's total GDP and provides jobs for 46 million people, or that CAP currently uses almost 40% of the common budget of the EU, that is more than 50 billion euros per year. But how is this 40% of the EU's common budget used? As income support for farmers and assistance for complying with sustainable agricultural practices, in market support for the stabilization of markets, and via rural development measures. Why do we have to support agriculture? Farmers' investments always depend on economic, health, and weather conditions that are beyond their control, which makes them vulnerable. Supporting farmers' incomes ensures food production throughout the EU and pays for the provision of public benefits which have no market value, for example, environmental protection, animal welfare, or safe and high-quality food, just to name a few. The main benefits of rural development support are the transfer of knowledge and innovation in rural areas, as well as the agricultural and forestry sectors, improving the competitiveness of the agricultural sector, the functioning of the food supply chain, ecosystem preservation, furthering effective resource management, and the economic development of rural areas. We need the Common Agricultural Policy to guarantee that consumers have access to safe, high-quality food at an affordable price. To be more prepared for future crises, we have to pay more attention to risk management in shaping the future of CAP.
Today, there are more than 500 million people in Europe. How can we ensure a stable supply of healthy, safe, and affordable food, now and in the future? The answer lies with our farmers, essential to our economy and our society. There are more than 12 million full-time farmers in the EU and 46 million people involved in farming and the agri-food sectors. But the farming business is at the mercy of economic and weather conditions beyond farmers' control, which is why Europe supports it through its Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP. This provides a safety net for Europe's many different kinds of farmers and farming practices so they can produce enough food. Over time, the policy has changed. Its newest reform makes the CAP greener, fairer, and more efficient. It supports farmers' incomes to ensure that they can continue to produce food throughout the EU and to help them deliver public benefits. It also offers new resources to farmers to strengthen their position in the food supply chain. Europe is known throughout the world for the quality and diversity of its food and culinary traditions. With the CAP, Europe's farmers can ensure an abundant variety of quality European products today, tomorrow, and for future generations. Europe's Common Agricultural Policy, taking care of our roots.
그렇네. 잘하신 것 같아. 손을 이렇게 만져가지고.
Hi there. In this video, let's talk about food, our most basic need. Access to food is a human right, so we all have the right to feed ourselves with dignity. But the food system is complicated, goes through multiple stages before reaching us. Have you ever wondered who is responsible for the food we eat and how we are able to access healthy, sustainable, and affordable food? To understand how food policy works in Europe, you need to know about the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP. In 1960, the policy is income support. Farmers receive direct payments to guarantee their income stability, as well as for actions usually remunerated by the markets, like taking care of the countryside. Secondly, market measures. These complement the direct income support for farmers and include market intervention, a provision of sector-specific support, rules on the marketing of agricultural products such as labeling and standards, and the managing of tariff quotas for international trade. And thirdly, rural development measures. Each member state receives a financial allocation to implement at least one national program. Each EU country and region can decide which measures are best based on their regional needs, under the condition that the chosen program falls in line with EU standards. Ever since its creation, the objective of the CAP has been to maximize production, and this aim has not since been reevaluated. This logic of maximizing agricultural production and inevitable oversaturation of the market has led to an unfair distribution of funding combined with unsustainable practices. Here's how. First, the CAP subsidies are hectare-based payments, which are not dependent on the meeting of criteria such as ecologically friendly, sustainable, and healthy production, or standards for workers' rights and animal welfare. Large farming operations and non-farming landowners have benefited from these sorts of subsidies, while small farmers are unable to compete. Small farmers can no longer make a decent living and have to end their commerce. This has led to a loss of jobs and a decline in economic activities in rural areas, and as a result, fewer people are living in the countryside. Meanwhile, industrialized farms take center stage, bringing little economic value to local communities and only employing small numbers of people. There is also a huge downside to productivity without sustainability. Farmers with less land have to produce more to make a profit. To save money, they resort to importing genetically modified soy or pesticide-treated monocultures from the United States, a pattern that contributes to the land grabbing and destruction of forests and savannas of South America. In order to cut costs and to comply with EU rules, farmers are forced to buy seeds from a handful of powerful agrochemical corporations. Consequently,
okay, hello everyone, and this week we're completely online. I think because of exams for some reason, week 9, I was asked to do everything online for this week. So there's no face-to-face in-class meeting, just everything's online. So before I forget, because I will forget, of course, we want to go to the cyber campus and go to policymaking in the European Union. And let me see, I would like to resume share here. And
about 75%.
No. I don't want to do that. Let me just close that. Okay, and screen share and go to Cyber Campus, and you can see there it is, and go to attendance and click on weeks 9 and add smart attendance, and the lottery number today is 849. 849 is your lucky number for policymaking in the European Union, 849. And so I'll let that run on its own. I don't think I really need to do anything for that. Okay, so your midterm, of course, is due tomorrow morning, your final draft. And I'm going to write very few, if any, comments. I'm just going to put a grade on the draft because I've already shared my comments extensively with you in the meetings. And I want to screen share again the grading criteria. I think I covered this in class, in terms of how I'm going to evaluate the final drafts. like I told some of you in the face-to-face meetings, right? An excellent paper. What do you need to get an excellent paper? The paper is good grammatically and stylistically, including proper and complete source footnote citations. Okay. It contains no factually wrong statements or claims lacking proof and is logical, insightful, and interesting. It supports well its thesis through use of full assigned course reading and research material. So, that means use and cite information from at least 3 of the different chapters from the first 5 chapters of the textbook, right? And to get that excellent point, an excellent paper has creative, original, and sophisticated insights, as well as clear logic and argumentation, addressing the most relevant counter argument. That's how I typically come up with something provocative and insightful, as I counteract an argument that someone would use against my thesis in a sentence or 2, okay? And then, as I talked about earlier, a good paper is good grammatically and stylistically, including proper footnotes. It contains no factually wrong statements, and it satisfies the requirements of the assignment, right? It satisfies the requirements of the assignment. It uses and cites information from 3 different sources. It just summarizes information. And then, of course, there are problems. When there are problems, like students do not use and cite specific information from at least 3 different chapters, then, the highest grade you can get is a C+, okay? And on down the line. So those are the grading criteria. And I think I want to make sure that I am recording. Yes, I am recording. Okay, I am recording. So of course, if anybody has questions, we can always take them at any time. I wanted to talk about some of the research I've been doing, work I've been doing on this topic of the Common Agricultural Policy as an example of some of the problematic issues around the Common Agricultural Policy, because that video you just saw, that video is produced by a non-governmental organization. It's funded by the European Parliament, by the European Union. So funding, of course, tends to shape people's perspectives. And so, not surprisingly, that Green European Foundation there defends the Common Agricultural Policy. But the Common Agricultural Policy is controversial in the view of many people, and both in Europe and outside of Europe, but particularly outside of Europe. And I mentioned in class, there was some discussion about the Common Agricultural Policy a year ago in the New York Times regarding how the Common Agricultural Policy is being used to support the ruling elites in those countries as their farming systems go through tremendous changes, right? I mean, I talked about the last class how when I went to Poland in 1989, 1990 for the first time, and then when I went to Bulgaria, at the beginning of the change away from communism, around 1/3 of the population were farmers. Around 1/3 of the population worked on farms, either on private farms or, and again, those statements are kind of blunt and general. I mean, a lot of people worked part-time on farms. They made money with growing private land that they were able to control and sell the products. Even at the end of communism, communism was moving towards using more and more private markets in their production. And so when we say like 1/3 of the population were farmers, I mean, that's a general statement. And I think I talked about how today, at least last time I checked, something like 15% of the Polish population are now farmers 30 years later, over 30 years later. And that highlights the tremendous changes underway in Eastern Europe, where most of the European Union's farmers live, is in Eastern Europe, right? Most of them live in Eastern Europe. And I did some reading yesterday, and I read that according to one source, for example, from 2003 to 2011, that's what, 7-8 years, from 2003 to 2011, the number of farmers, individual farming households in Bulgaria had declined by 44% in that 7 or 8 year period from 2003 to 2011, right? In other words, farms were sold to other farmers, or other investors bought that land and are aggregating that agricultural land, putting together those little small farm plots to make bigger farm plots. Maybe they're doing something else as well, like maybe, you know, building new roads and highways and industrial areas. But most of that reduction in the number of farmers involves the closing of the selling out, the bankruptcy, the buying out of smaller farmers, and the accumulation of those small plots of land into bigger plots of land to make it more of a large farm enterprise, right? And you can imagine how stressful that could potentially be. If, you know, we're talking about people who've been living on the land for generations, and then for someone to lose the farm, someone to lose their family farm could be potentially a very stressful event, an event that could lead to among other things, political radicalization. And the Common Agricultural Policy in Eastern Europe has played an important role in guiding that process, directing that process. It's not only, of course, the market forces at work and the Common Agricultural Policy. A lot of people, of course, younger people in particular, don't want to work on the farm. They don't want to stay on the farm, right? So even if the farm is making a profit, they don't want to stay in the village. They want to go live in a big city. They want to go live in Sofia. They want to go live in Warsaw. They want to go live in a big city where there's a professional career, where they get a college. They go to college, or they go away from the village to college, and they end up staying in the town where they went to college, or go to some other town to get a job with a college degree, right? Unlike their parents and grandparents. And so it's not always a case of cruelty and severe market forces forcing people to do things they don't want to do, but that is certainly an incentive. And of course, you Koreans know all about this, right? I mean, since I've been here in South Korea, I've heard that there are hundreds of thousands of non-Koreans have moved to Korea, including people like me, but also many women from Malaysia and Vietnam to provide wives for Korean farmers, because the Korean men in the farming areas often have difficulty finding women who will marry them and want to stay on the farm. Women don't want to stay on the farm. They want to move to the city. So a lot of these people moving to Korea are people that are agreeing to marry Korean farmers because the Korean farmers can't find wives in Korea, right? So, and so this article that I want to highlight here came out in New York Times, and I'm working with this article. It says here, and this is a long article. This is over 4,000 words long. You know, rarely do you find such long articles. And it was on page 1. It was on the front page of the New York Times. And I won't go through all of it, of course, here, but they highlight this, a New York Times investigation. It focuses on Hungary. And of course, Hungary is a focus of a lot of controversy these days because of the long-term prime minister government under Viktor Orban, under his Fidesz party, has been criticized for acting in adopting policies that undermine the potential protections for human rights by, for example, exercising too much control over the judicial branch. So it goes on here. Under communism, farmers labored in the fields that stretched for miles around this town west of Budapest, reaping wheat and corn for a government that had stolen their land. Of course, under communism, the communist Stalinist regimes that came to power in Eastern Europe at the end of World War II, one of their big policy moves was to expropriate the land of the peasants and force them to work on collective farms. And a lot of that did happen, but also that didn't happen completely in many places. Like in Poland, there were still lots of peasants who had private plots of land. And I think also in Bulgaria, not so much in East Germany. East Germany, the German communist regime in East Germany expropriated pretty much all the land. And actually, that has actually had an interesting effect, because those large state-owned collective farms transformed into large private sector commercial farms, which is, you know, typically what you find in profitable farms in United States or elsewhere, that they're large, right? So Anyway, just to show you this article highlighting the criticisms of the Common Agricultural Policy. Today, their children toil for new overlords, the children of these old farmers, a group of oligarchs and political patrons who have annexed the land through opaque deals with the Hungarian government. They have created a modern twist on a feudal system, giving jobs and aid to their compliant, punishing the mutinous. And it says, these land barons, it turns out, are financed and emboldened by the European Union. Every year, the 28 country bloc, now 27 with Britain's exit, pays out $65 billion in farm subsidies intended to support, that's about a third of the European Union budget, right? That's about a third of the annual European Union budget. Pays out $65 billion in farm subsidies intended to support farmers around the continent and keep rural communities alive. But across Hungary and much of Central and Eastern Europe, the bulk of that money goes to a connected and powerful few. The Prime Minister of the Czech Republic collected tens of millions of dollars in subsidies just last year. Subsidies have underwritten mafia-style land grabs in Slovakia and Bulgaria. And before I go on, I want to highlight, by the way, that this questionable allocation of land to the rich and powerful, so that the rich and powerful become even more rich and potentially more powerful, is referenced in that video I was just showing you, right? It's true also throughout Western Europe that the biggest beneficiaries of the Common Agricultural Policy are the large agribusinesses that own and control thousands and thousands of hectares of land. Since the budget of the Common Agricultural Policy is allocated in aid based on how much land the farmers have, the farmers with the biggest amount of land get a bigger share of the money. There's efforts to change that, but it's a slow process because, you know, politically people don't want to give up what they have, right? If you're receiving all of those funds, to be told that they're going to be taken away from you is politically very difficult, obviously. And I remember someone told me, I never investigated this several years ago. It's not only a problem just in Eastern Europe. Someone, you know, I mean, we haven't talked about the different kinds of regimes so much in European nation states in this class. There's a chapter on member states, just a cursory outline of the kinds of member states that came in. And there was reference, for example, to the newer members started joining when they democratized in the 1980s, namely Spain, Portugal, and Greece. And Spain democratized without the overthrow of the communist dictator, not the authoritarian, quasi-fascist, authoritarian conservative dictator, Francisco Franco, who died in his sleep in 1975. And he ruled, he called himself a fascist, but his regime was a mix of traditional and populist elements. But what it did do was it supported the maintenance of the Yangban, the aristocracy in Spain. And this aristocracy, this traditional aristocracy, including the king, and there's still a king in Spain, of course, Felipe, this aristocracy controls a lot of land because they inherited over many, many generations, right? Aristocratic feudal landlords. And so some of these aristocratic feudal landlords are the biggest beneficiaries in Spain of the Common Agricultural Policy because they control huge tracts of land in Spain. And because they've always had that land and they're involved in farming. And so these rich aristocrats are also getting the benefit there as well. So, I mean, I was thinking about that when this report mentioned that a modern twist on a feudal system. You still have a feudal system in Spain, in the heart of Western Europe. It goes on here just to highlight the Common Agricultural Policy because, you know, we can't talk too much about all of these different policies, but the Common Agricultural Policy obviously is a centerpiece of the public policy of the European Union. It goes on here. The program is the biggest item in the European Union's central budget, accounting for 40% of expenditures. It's one of the biggest subsidy programs in the world, yet some lawmakers in Brussels who write and vote on foreign policy admit they often have no idea where the money goes. That's because they leave it to the member states to allocate and divide up the money. Remember, the European Union bureaucracy is really small. I mean, it's about the size of a city municipal government in France, of Paris in France, or the Ministry of Culture in France. They rely upon the member states to do the work of implementing these policies and distributing the funds that the European Union has agreed to disperse. One place it goes, the money that is, goes is here in Fiera County, home to Hungary's populist Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, an icon to Europe's far right and a harsh critic of Brussels and European elites. Mr. Orban is happy to accept European Union money. The Times investigation found that he uses European subsidies as a patronage system that enriches his friends and family, protects his political interests, and punishes his rivals. Mr. Orban's government has auctioned off thousands of acres of state land that was, land that was communist owned under the communist system, to his family members and close associates, including one childhood friend who has become one of the richest men in the country, the Times investigation found. Those who control the land in turn qualify for millions in subsidies from the European Union. So what this tells you also is that Viktor Orban and the populists in France, at least the elites, have a strong incentive to stay in the European Union, even if they criticize the European Union and its policies, including policies advocating the more tolerant treatment of Gypsy, Roma, and LGBTQ rights, and so on. It goes on here. The European Union spends 3 times as much as the United States on farm subsidies each year, but as the system has expanded, accountability has not kept up. National governments publish some information on recipients, but the largest beneficiaries hide behind complex ownership structures. And although farmers are paid in part based on their acreage, property data is kept secret, making it harder to track land grabs and corruption. The European Union maintains a master database, but citing the difficulty of downloading the requested information, refused to provide the Times a copy. And then it goes on. And like I said, I'm not going to cover it all here. I should also mention that this is a main obstacle to moving forward in World Trade Organization negotiations to reduce further tariff barriers to trade, because the European Union is hostile or resistant to opening up its agricultural markets to imports from particularly more efficient farming sectors in the United States in particular. So the United States is always pressing the European Union to open up its markets to imports. You can see it spends 3 times as much as US on farm subsidies. US also spends money on farm subsidies, but the European Union spends more. And the European Union just flat refuses, including under that previous European Commission under Jean-Claude Juncker, the one before Ursula von der Leyen came into office at the beginning of this year, and then everything became swept up in dealing with the pandemic, right? But the United States has been pressing the European Commission, the European Union, to open up its agricultural markets to American exports, and they refuse. And one of the reasons they refuse is because of this massive transformation underway already in Eastern Europe that the European Union is trying to guide and keep politically under control, right? Like I told you, I mean, you can't have 1/3 of your population as farmers in a developed economy. Like I said, US percent of people in the farming sector is what, 3.5%. The same must be true in South Korea. And still, after 30 years, we still have 15% of the population of Poland working as farmers. More than 30 years after communism collapsed. Even as the European Union champions the subsidy program as an essential safety net for hardworking farmers, subsidies have repeatedly shown that 80% of the money goes to the biggest 20% of recipients. Yeah. And some of those at the top have used the money to amass political power. Yeah, if you have money, you typically get political power too. Yeah. Hear about Bulgaria, something area I'm thinking about. In Bulgaria, the subsidies have become welfare for the farming elite. The Bulgarian Academy of Sciences found that 75% of the main type of European agricultural subsidy in the country ends up in the hands of about 100 entities. This spring, the authorities carried out raids across the country and exposed corrupt ties between government officials and agricultural businessmen. One of the biggest flour producers in the country was charged with fraud in connection with subsidies and is awaiting trial. And you go on here, European Union officials dismissed a 2015 report that recommended tightening farm subsidy rules as a safeguard against Central and Eastern European land grabbing. The European Parliament rejected a bill that would have banned politicians from benefiting from the subsidies they administer, and top officials swat away suggestions of fraud. We have an almost watertight system, Rudolf Muglier, one of Europe's top agricultural officials, said in an interview earlier this year. Unstated is that while audits can catch instances of outright fraud, there's a European Court of Auditors that's supposed to monitor. But again, the European Union bureaucracy is small. They can't do it. They have to rely on the member states. Rooting out self-dealing and legalized corruption is far more difficult. The European Union seldom interferes with national affairs, giving deference to elected leaders. Indeed. And so I think that's about it. And so he justifies it, Viktor Orban saying, you know, politics is a battlefield. If you're, you know, I'll help you if you help me. And I am the elected leader of Hungary. And so, yes, I'm allocating CAP subsidies and I'm directing them to people that support me. A modern feudalism, the article goes on. I already mentioned, again, that the national governments are responsible for allocating these funds. In Bulgaria, for example, land brokers had pushed for laws allowing them to effectively annex small farms in Bulgaria. Yeah, yeah. The deference, that, you know, respect to national governments is a hallmark of the European Union, but it has left the bloc unable or unwilling to confront leaders who try to undermine its efforts. And just to go on here, so that summarizes that focus on the common agricultural policy. And of course, this report came out at the same time when there was another European election in Britain as to who would become, who would be prime minister. And so that sort of overwhelmed this report. I haven't seen any follow-up on this investigation. I haven't even seen letters to the editor regarding this report. And then, of course, Boris Johnson won the elections in Britain in a overwhelming sense. And then they left the European Union, Britain left the European Union at the end of January, and then COVID-19 came. And so all of this has been pushed to the side as a topic. But the politics involved in bringing about a relatively orderly, politically, it's got to be politically organized, a transformation of the farming sector in Eastern Europe is unavoidable. And so I think that's the main reason why, one of the main reasons why the European Union defends the common agricultural policy in attacks against the United States. And it's not just, of course, the countries that are already in the European Union. Ukraine someday may want to join the European Union, although the European Union claims it's not pushing for that. But I'm sure Ukrainian nationalists would love to join the European Union. And that's a country, another country of 50 million people, bigger even than Poland, right? And they have the same kind of issues with a large agricultural sector. Turkey wants to join the European Union. There's a lot of Turkish farmers in that country of 80 million people. So that common agricultural policy is politically vital to European cohesion. And I think that's one of the main reasons why the European Union defends it, which is not adequately emphasized in American reporting regarding the common agricultural policy. You know, even in this article, they're shocked that the European Union member state governments are utilizing the CAP subsidies to strengthen their political base of support. You know, I mean, what politician doesn't use public policy to try to strengthen their political base of support? It's just that it's so blatant in the case of the Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe is undergoing revolutionary change for the last 30 years. And still going to undergoing far-reaching change, right? And the idea is one of the aims is to maintain, you know, peaceful control over that process. So that's the article I was highlighting in the New York Times about the common agricultural policy. And let's see here. I want to show you, I mean, again, an example of how the common agricultural policy served its purpose. Here is an article that came out about a long time ago when in the early, in 2002, actually, I should say. This person, Andrzej Leper, was a Polish politician who built his political movement claiming as a representative of Polish farmers to defend the interests of Polish farmers when Poland was going to join the European Union in 2004. And this article comes out in 2002, and he built his political movement on fear and anxiety regarding what European Union integration would mean, particularly for Polish farmers, that the Polish farm sector would be open up to competition, and the Polish farmers would lose their land, maybe with outsiders coming and buying up their land, and getting terrified regarding what would happen when Poland joined the European Union. And then they joined the European Union, and it turned out that Polish farmers, despite this person's demagoguery, spreading fear and terror regarding what would happen when Poland joined the European Union, in terms of outsiders taking or rich people taking the lands of the poor Polish peasants and so on. It turned out that the Polish farming sector loves the common agricultural policy. I mean, once they joined, they found this to be wonderful, generally speaking. Even though, as I said, lots of Polish farmers are going out of business, and same is true in other countries as well. But the agricultural sector overall in Poland loves the common agricultural policy. And they understood what it involved once they joined the European Union in 2004. And then there was always rumors that this person, Andrzej Leper, was receiving funds from Russia in some way. And then eventually he got charged with sexual harassment, that he sexually assaulted some women, and then he killed himself. And you don't know about him, but when I was, of course, following Eastern Europe immediately after communism fell, there was a lot of coverage of this individual and populism in Russia, in these countries, and the common agricultural policy serves its function. It stabilized and politically co-opted the agricultural sector, and that's a big sector of these populations in Eastern Europe, into supporting the European Union. Even as Poland complains about European Union requiring or pressuring the countries to allow gay marriage and demanding protections for judicial autonomy, the agricultural sector in these countries, they like, generally speaking, overall, I'm not talking about individual farmers, but the agricultural sector and their representatives, they like the European Union. And and that's something to note, that Britain's agricultural sector was very small, relatively speaking, and so there wasn't that big of an agricultural sector lobby in Britain to stay in the European Union. When we're talking about a very small section of the population, and of course the agricultural industries were supportive of the European Union, but we're not talking about a big section of the population that's involved in agriculture, relatively speaking, like we see in Poland or Romania or these other East European countries. And as I said, as more Eastern European countries join, they're also going to be taking advantage of the common agricultural policy. Aside from the big ones like Ukraine, if it joins, still Serbia wants to join, Bosnia wants to join, Macedonia wants to join, Albania wants to join, and these all have large agricultural populations, although they're all declining along with the de facto integration of those countries into the European regional system. So the European Union's common agricultural policy served its political function, stabilizing helping to stabilize these new young democracies in Eastern Europe that are undergoing revolutionary transformation, that are overseeing revolutionary transformations that on a scale that we've never seen before in modern history. I mean, even the defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan was total and devastating, the collapse of those regimes, but still those regimes are still capitalistic. So they knew those capitalists were still around, right? They still knew how to run a capitalist economy, but they had to build just about almost everything, pretty much, not everything, but most things from the beginning in these former communist countries to create new capitalist and democratic political systems. Okay, and some other criticisms of the common agricultural policy. you know, it sounds great that the European Union is you know, trying to structure its common agricultural policy to stabilize these regimes. But here was an interesting article that came out 5 years ago in the op-ed section of the New York Times, highlighting how the European Union is opposed to science through its common agricultural policy. So keep in mind, there's all this talk today about science, science, science. Listen to the science in dealing with the coronavirus and the pandemic. Science is telling us about global climate change, and we need to, and it is caused by human beings. And the scientists are telling us overwhelmingly that we need to act, and they're making predictions about what's going to happen in terms of how the climate will change and the consequences in terms of more climate disasters and crises. Listen to the scientists, the scientists, the science, 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 right? And here you see the European Union and its common agricultural policy. Sorry? Somebody has a question? Okay, I thought I'm hearing, so you can mute your, okay, good. So here's an article about how, and you saw that in the video that I was showing right before class about how the small farmers in Europe are pressured to use genetically modified organisms from the United States. Boo, boo, like that's a bad thing, right? Here's this article criticizing the European Union's common agricultural policy as opposed to science. And keep that in mind as the Trump's opponents, Donald Trump's opponents, and including many Europeans criticize the Trump administration for not following the science. They can, other people are turning around and looking at the European Union. Well, you don't follow the science as well because you're afraid about opening up your inefficient farm sectors to full competition within the farming sectors that hurting not only American farmers, Indian farmers. It's not just the United States. It's got a problem with the British restrictions on imports. I'm sorry, the European restrictions on agricultural imports. The Indians do as well. India is also complaining about the common agricultural policy of Europe. It's a major stumbling block, not the only one, but the European Union common agricultural policy is a major issue in terms of blocking, obstructing efforts to move forward on further World Trade Organization reduction in worldwide tariffs. Here's this article, and it's a little bit old, but I haven't seen any evidence that it's not being addressed. Call it the Coalition of the Ignorant. By the first week of October, 17 European countries, including Austria, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, and Poland, had used new European rules to announce bans on the cultivation of genetically modified crops. Now, keep in mind, I'm from the United States, right? We've been growing and eating genetically modified crops in the United States for decades. For decades, many, many years, with no physical health issues. But the Europeans insist that genetically modified crops are dangerous in various ways. Maybe, you know, they might not focus on dangers to human health, but somehow it'll destabilize the ecological system in the environment. They come up with all sorts of arguments. Meanwhile, we've been using genetically modified crops in the United States for decades. All right. These prohibitions expose the worrying reality of how far Europe has gone in setting itself against modern science. True, the bans do not apply directly to scientific research, and a few countries, led by England, have declared themselves open to cultivation of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. And that was an article that I came across for those advocating Brexit inside Britain, advocating leaving the European Union. The European Union was a barrier to biotech, that it wasn't because of the farming sector's hostility to genetically modified organisms, both plants and animals, biotech was being discouraged. And because the farmers didn't want to be threatened by these technological innovations. But the chilling effect on biotech science in Europe will be dramatic. Why would anyone spend years developing genetically modified crops in knowledge that they will most likely be outlawed by government fiat? In effect, the continent is shutting up shop for an entire field of human scientific and technological endeavor. This is analogous to America's declaring an automobile boycott in 1910, or Europe's prohibiting the printing press in the 15th century. This is an op-ed piece, by the way. So this is not this is somebody's opinion. Beginning with Scotland's prohibition on domestic genetically modified crop cultivation on August 9th, Europe's scientists and farmers watched with mounting dismay as other countries followed suit. Following the Scottish decision, signatories from numerous scientific organizations and academic institutions wrote to the Scottish government to express grave concern about the potential negative effect on science in Scotland. The decision of a majority of European countries to apparently ignore their own experts may undermine any claim to their moral high ground at the coming Paris talks on climate change. So, of course, those talks did the Paris Accord on climate change in 2015 that Donald Trump has declared the US is leaving. The worldwide scientific consensus on the safety of genetic engineering is as solid as that on which underpins human-caused global warming. Yet this inconvenient truth on GMOs, that they're as safe as conventionally cultivated food, is ignored when ideological interests are threatened. And that's the claim, right? That the Europeans come up with fake excuses why they do not want to implement genetically modified crops to be imported, or to even allow the technology to be used inside Europe, because it's going to threaten inefficient farmers, right? The scientific community is facing a new European reality. Last November, the European Commission's President Jean-Claude Juncker chose not to reappoint Professor Anne Glover as a science advisor after lobbying by Greenpeace and other environmental groups. So again, and then you see, this is not a European group, this is a worldwide group, Greenpeace. And it goes on here, facing this hostile climate, the crop biotech sector in Europe is dying. The plant science division of the agrochemical giant BASF closed its doors in Germany back in 2012, shifting some operations to the friendlier climes of the United States. In the public sector, the European Academy's Science Advisory Council, the leading voice of science in Europe, lamented in 2013, the EU is falling behind international competitors in agricultural innovation, and this has implications for EU goals for science and innovation. Now, with the pandemic and accelerating climate change, we're going to need all the scientific tools we have to address these challenges, right? And they go on to say that the impacts this is having on the third world, right? The European Union claims to be the leading humanitarian actor in providing humanitarian aid for the poverty-stricken sectors of the world. The new anti-GMO policy aligns Europe with some unsavory allies. Russia has proudly proclaimed a prohibition on GMO crops. So has Zimbabwe, where anti-Western conspiracy theories about biotech companies have become part of the ruling party's ideology. According to Tobiya Modede, a crony of President Robert Mugabe, he's gone now, sexual dysfunction is a huge problem in the United States, where males become impotent around the age of 24 at the prime of life, which he linked to GMO foods. Total garbage, right? This person goes on, I have witnessed the effects of such propaganda myself. While giving a talk about GMOs 2 years ago in rural Tanzania, I was interrupted by an organic farmer who said he was determined never to grow biotech crops. His grounds, they'd turn his children homosexual. Not just autocrats and crazies think this way. Perfectly sensible African policymakers still look to Europe for leadership. When I travel there, I'm often asked why Africans should risk eating foods that Europe bars. Following Europe's lead, no country in sub-Saharan Africa except South Africa currently permits the cultivation of GMO crops, food crops. Yet from drought-tolerant maize, corn, to virus-resistant cassava, many biotech traits are being developed that could quickly improve the livelihoods of poor African farmers. I have spent time with malnourished children in Tanzania whose families were going hungry because cassava crops were wiped out by brown streak disease. That was particularly painful because in neighboring Uganda, I recently visited trial plots of genetically modified cassava that demonstrated complete resistance to the virus that causes that brown streak disease. The faces of the hungry children come to mind every time I hear European politicians boast about their country's GMO ban and demand the rest of the world follow suit, as Scotland's minister did in August. Thanks to Europe's coalition of the ignorant, we are witnessing a historic injustice perpetrated by the well-fed on the food insecure. Europe's stance, if taken up internationally, risks marginalizing a critically important technology that we must surely employ if humanity is to feed itself sustainably in an increasingly difficult and challenging future. I can only hope that the continent's policymakers come to their senses before it is too late. So here we are 5 years later, and I haven't seen much European movement on this, although, as I said, the European Union has, let me close that. The European British Brexit advocates were pointing to European Union policy, pointing out that they should be able to move more quickly in biotech if they left the European Union. And so that will definitely be a factor, that is a factor underway right now as I speak to you regarding negotiations between Britain and European Union about British subsidies for emerging technologies, emerging industries, including biotech. But the European Union is afraid that Britain's going to devote lots of money to new biotech industries and flood the European Union market with these subsidized industries, products, and undermine the European Union producers. That's one of, and of course, just to show you, right, that South Korea is 100% online with biotech. This highlights, this report from a few years ago, from 4 years ago, highlights how South Korean companies are working closely with Chinese companies. China is full on with biotech. US is, well, I mean, there's efforts to restrict it. For example, using stem cells from aborted fetuses, right, is problematic from the point of view of many anti-abortion activists. But South Korea and certainly the Chinese, they've got no problems about engaging in cloning, about doing whatever it takes. So, of course, South Korea was a leader in cloning, and there have been some scandals. So, should the European Union Parliament demand that, okay, the European Union has already, not the European Parliament, sorry, the European Parliament has already passed a resolution demanding that the European Union, calling for the European Union to ban cloning animals, to forbid the cloning of animals, you know, like sheep and cattle and cows and pigs for agricultural purposes. Or to prevent also products made from cloned animals to be imported from the United States or anywhere else. So and the European Commission has responded by not responding. Like the European Commission has the sole right to propose legislation, right? So the European Parliament can ask, hey, European Commission, come up with a proposal to ban animal cloning and animal cloned products in the European Union. And the Commission won't do it. They refuse to do it. They have not done it. Clearly because a lot of countries in the European Union don't think it's a good idea. And so that takes us to, I think you were, watching that. So we can go then to a poll. And let's see, I have a poll and edit. And I think I should have a poll. Where's my polls? Hold it. Where's my polls? Hold it, I don't want to do something I'm going to regret. My polls should just come up. I had them all set up. Where are they? You know what happened? You know what's going on? Somebody else is sharing this website, this Zoom site address. And for somehow my polls, that surveys I've set up, they're being deleted. I mean, I had a number of them ready to go and they're gone. I don't know if it was intentional, probably not, but they're gone. So that's the danger with using these class Zoom sites. A lot of people are using them. A lot of professors are using them, and people access the same place, and they go and do this. So maybe I can go ahead and just do it like this. So here we are in 2020, and so I'll do and I can see now it's asking me, and I'm afraid if I don't, not very careful, this thing is going to shut down, and I don't want to shut it down because then I'll lose the recording. I think that happened once before. So now it's asking me to sign in. I'm already signed in. So, well, I guess we only have a few minutes left. So I was going to have you do a survey, but I guess we won't. So in just a few minutes left, and here, here's another article from 2 years ago, over 2 years ago. How do you define a genetically modified crop? I mean, we've always been involved in genetic modifications of crops for 150 years, right? In terms of selective breeding to promote certain genetic characteristics of plants and animals for agriculture and human needs, like dog breeds, for example. And it says environmental groups such as Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth raise concerns that genetically modified crops posed unpredictable dangers, that the plants might escape farmers' fields and spread through wild ecosystems. For instance, perhaps hybridizing with wild plants and introducing their genes into new species. Environmental groups also raise the possibility that genetically modified crops should harm human health. Genetically modified crops not only produce proteins from their own genes, but from the genes of other species as well. And so it says, while the government has put in place a number of regulations governing genetically modified crops, the industry has boomed. Over 185 million acres of these crops were planted in the United States in 2017. In Europe, by contrast, concerns about genetically modified organisms led to the European Union to issue a directive in 2001. From the early stage of research to marketplace, these products would have to pass a series of tests for environmental risks and human safety. In 2017, only 325,000 acres in Europe were planted across the continent with genetically modified crops. So it's interesting to read these articles and these reports now in the midst of the pandemic and the focus on science, 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 science. We must follow the science. We need scientists, science, science. Here you see the European Union not being a leader on following the science when it comes to GMOs. And the claim is they're not following the science because there are vast economic interests in the agricultural sector in Europe that are afraid of competition, because Europe's agricultural sector is less efficient than United States, and I assume Canada, maybe Australia as well, although Australia has problems with water and droughts these days. Okay, that we're almost about done then. Does anybody have any, let me see, yeah, I can't set up a poll without doing something that's going to, I get this screen to re-sign in on Zoom again. I shouldn't have to do that. So I can't do any more polls with you. I actually have to keep that in mind. We'll have to do some other kinds of in-class exercises. Probably breakout rooms will be limited, the limit to what we can do in the future. Because the polls, I can't set up polls, surveys anymore. And that means, like, when we do the debate, so next week we have a debate, and let me see if I can get the, I'll ask you to vote on who won the debate on Cyber Campus. On Cyber Campus, that seems to work really nicely. It's really convenient. And so you see I'm going to be debating with Ho Ryong, and on the question to South Koreans, the EU's response to the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic are steps forward to creating a United States of Europe. And I will argue pro, and Ho Ryong will argue con. So any questions? If not, I will then end the meeting and save the recording and post the recording for you to see if you want to, okay? Bye.